Marianne Williamson has penned a phrase that is so powerful and beautiful. She says that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. I believe this to be true. And like Tevye, on the other hand, I believe that fear of inadequacy or failure or death or some other deep and terrifying darkness has stalked all of us at one time or another. It was there with Abram in the midst of making a covenant with God. It was there with Jesus, certainly in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I feel it in today's reading as well. Let's take another look at Abram's covenant with God. In verses 9 and 10, we get an image of Abram slaughtering animals, cutting them in half lengthwise. Now, this may seem a little ghoulish in our society, where many of us have not been near a farm, or at least some of the younger generation have not been near a farm, and we buy our meat cut and wrapped in plastic, tenderly laid on a bed of styrofoam. But in the ancient world, sacrificing and offering your most valuable goods showed that you were about to make a serious covenant, a promise, an agreement. The story goes a little stranger, though, when we get to verse 12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. What's this? I'm always interested in the parts that people leave out in the lectionary. It's not mentioned in the Seasons of the Spirit curriculum. It's not in Walter Brueggemann's commentary on Genesis either, so you really got to wonder what's going on. We know that Abram longs for a child, a son specifically in that culture. And in that time in the Hebrew history, there was not a strong theology of life after death. So the way that you went on in the world was through your children and your children's children. Abraham has no son, and it seems that his time has run out. But even if he could have a child, would it be worth the risk? And again, ironically, the lectionary reads out verses 13 to 16, those verses that Abraham hears of his children's children becoming slaves for 400 years. Is it even right to bring a child into such a world? When we look at our world today, do we not fear for the well-being of our children's children? During a Bible study on this passage, a woman told of sitting around the kitchen with her mother and grandmother. The year was 1964 in Michigan. And she wondered about bringing a child into such a world where the Cold War was happening between Russia and the United States. And racial tension. This is when Martin Luther King was just getting well into it, and people were paying attention. As they talked, her mother shared the fear that she had being pregnant in the middle of the Second World War. And the grandmother shared her fear of being pregnant as World War I was about to break on the scene. And so part of Abram's fear might be about the risk and pain that his children's children will suffer. This isn't the first time that he has heard this promise from God. Abram and Sarah left their retirement home because they thought that God said, despite all the evidence to the contrary, despite Sarah's barrenness, and despite that they were old codgers, really, that they would produce a child. There's no indication that Sarah is pregnant. And yet, Abram hears this compelling holy voice again, this crazy promise of children and land where all evidence is stacked against him. He has slaughtered these animals. The sun is going down. The vultures are beginning to congregate. And a deep and terrifying darkness descends on him. Now, perhaps he hears a different voice, a taunting voice.
Fool, you stupid, dreaming old fool, what have you done? There will be no child. Not only will you remain childless and die as insignificantly as you were born, you've also just wasted a perfectly good heifer, a goat, a ram, and 2 birds. Have fun explaining that to Sarah, fool.
A voice that cautions.
Be careful what you pray for, old man. You just might get it. Even if Sarah could bear a child, she'll probably die in the process. Are you going to nurse the child, you selfish old man? You have heard the stories. A child born late in a woman's life is seldom a healthy child. Your seed is old, her soil is dry. And if a sick child is born, will you be there to care for him when he is a man and still cannot care for himself? Do you think other men will allow him to live?
Darkness, deep and terrifying. And yet, after that deep and terrifying darkness, when the gentle dark of evening settles in, Abram holds to his faith. He chooses to believe God's promise despite all the evidence to the contrary, and his faith becomes an anchor for 3 major world religions and generations who follow. Well, let us turn our attention to the gospel. There's no deep and terrifying darkness here. We're safe. It's a powerful and lovely image of Jesus wanting to gather the people of Jerusalem as a hen gathers her brood of chicks under her wings. And yet, even as Jesus longs to do that, as he longs to protect them and enlighten them, to show them the fullness of life, he knows that they just don't get it. That they just don't care. Not only do they not care, some are clearly opposed to him, especially those in power. It would cost them too much. And at the top of the pole with that attitude is the ruling puppet king, Herod. Herod wants him dead. And then we find that Jesus has some unexpected allies. Some Pharisees come and warn him about Herod. And the Pharisees often get bad press in our Gospels. Clearly, some of them did oppose Jesus, but not all. And in fact, some Pharisees themselves had been executed for speaking out against Herod. So now they have come to warn him. They try to protect him from being another victim of Herod's wrath. Well, Jesus starts out talking tough. So, Herod wants me dead, does he? Well, you can go tell that old fox for me. I have things to do. I'll do it my way. And in my time, and no matter what it looks like on the outside, I'm going to win this one. Yeah. I'm going to Jerusalem. Why? It just would not be proper for a prophet to be killed outside of the holy city, now would it? Oh, his head understands. But I expect the deep and terrifying darkness worked its way into his heart. Can you hear another voice?
You failed, man. You haven't made a difference to anything. All your preaching about love and second chances, all your compassion and healing, do you think that will make any difference when they drag you through the streets? You'll be on your own, more alone than you've ever been before. Even these disciples of yours will be. And when the going gets tough, how can you have anything but contempt for any of these fickle, cowardly humans?
After the terrifying darkness, the voice of doubt, we hear the anguish that is based in love. Oh, Jerusalem, look at you, killing all the messengers God sends to you. How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not let me. You were not willing. And his anguish is not just for himself, but for them. He grieves their struggle under the weight of their own spiritual blindness, the weight of foreign military power, how it has frightened them and kept them from being all they could be. But what does he do? He goes to Jerusalem. Did that make any difference? Has it made a difference in why we are gathered here today? And if it doesn't, do you want to ask yourself why you're here?